Okay. These will all get posted. I have one slide in here that I may have to flash through and take out before, which is goofy because it's public material. And then we might need some header on it that says, OCP Austin, which is like a 5 header. So it says Radisys because it's our template, but other than that, this is general stuff. So we did a little bit of agenda hashing, not a lot, on the group alias or email list, and that pretty much stuck whatever people saw. So the first couple of items Radisys was touching, so I'm going to go ahead and walk us through those. And then I think we have some that Tom is going to be spearheading. I apologize up front to Tom. I may not make it to the very end. I'm going to leave here around 3:15 or so. Just I have a flight to catch, but we'll see how it goes. So this is what I had kind of in this part of the domain. So it looks like it's an hour. It's about two-ish hours of stuff. Is that about right, Bill? I mean, we'll just this is pretty flexible. This should be, I think, a less formal setting than the summit where it's more presentation. I was wondering how many chairs. So that's how we list the potential attendees. It was like 120. If that many people are I'm going to spend a few minutes on the spec that we approved last year, just refreshing in a little bit of kind of where it is right now. A lot of you have heard that, but there's some new hands that people haven't, so I think we'll spend a lot of time on that. Some of this stuff's published, so it's easy to see. Then I had a couple of things on kind of where do we go next with this in particular and anything. And I think what we wanted to do, and I know Bill wants this, is a lot of these are going to have kind of a round table. So if there's something in number 2 and someone's like, hey, look, here's the trajectory that we're really thinking of contributing or we want to see happen, we'll have a chance to do that. Then in the third section, we were going to talk about some of the projects in the pipeline that are recently approved, related to the telco side of things. So we've got a couple to talk about. 80, oh, I like that better. 80, is there one in between this? Okay. So 80 Link has a couple, and again, even in that third section, if there's something that we don't know about, I think we'd all love to hear about. Someone's like, hey, I'm working on contribution, and it's coming up in November. Bring it up. Or it would be interesting. There's a panel suggested. We talked about it. I got a whole bunch of questions, good panel stuff, but I'm not quite sure how that comes together, who's on the panel, so I'm counting on Bill there. See how that goes. Or it might be a little bit ad hoc. It could be interesting, but around, I think Tom might have suggested, we both suggested the topic, which is sourcing models of the ecosystem. And I think it's near and dear. You saw those hands go up, right? A lot of people from the supplier side, also people from the operator side. This should be a mix. If this ever tilts too far one direction, then I think it's not the right thing. And it's a collaborative thing. So part of that is how not so much what's happened in the past, but going forward, how is the commercial side of this going to work out? How do small vendors fit in with big partners? How is the actual DevOps deployment of networks going to go? I'm sure there's a lot of different ideas. We've heard a lot of things in our commercial discussions. So that's what that's on. And then the last section here was actually showing a couple of examples. That's one where I have one that is absolutely public. I'm just not sure. Spent a lot of time on the slide, so we'll see. I'll check my email for that. And I have a couple others. I had 3 or 4. Again, be thinking ahead. If anybody has for section 5, a deployment or a POC relative to OCP and telco operators to speak about, even if you just want to put your hand up and talk about it, that'd be fine. I have just a couple slides here. I can feel the air if I need to fill the air, but this should be collaborative. Sound good? All good? Okay. Start with this. So this particular architecture is probably the first thing that kind of came from this community, the telco side. The history of the telco, and it kind of has both the telco group, the telco work group. I think, if I understand, and you can correct me if I get it wrong, it was formed to kind of create almost an overlay. We've had discussions about this on the phone calls, like an overlay to OCP. Like OCP is doing a lot of cool stuff. And this is kind of like, hey, let's look at it from a telco's perspective. What application of those technologies, not necessarily to drive, may or may not, but not necessarily, wasn't instantiated with a mission to go drive a bunch of new contributions, but it's a place to hold contributions that come with sort of a telco central office kind of perspective, which again could be just reuse of technologies that are happening and shared between enterprise, web scale, and telco. As it turns out, we were working on something that fits very nicely into this, and we did use this forum to evangelize, talk about it, and actually contribute and get a spec approved. And so that's what this, what we ended up calling CG-OpenRack-19, which is, think of it as a telco derivative of the OpenRack spec, and we'll talk about that. So that's what this is, but to be clear that the telco working group is not solely focused on this. This is just one of multiple things, and who knows what the future will bring. So actually, I should do a hand show. How many people have kind of seen this, heard this on the calls or whatnot? I kind of want to see how much is fresh and how much is not. So if you're pretty familiar with this, and okay, not that or else, so I think this is relevant to some of what we talk about later. This,
hey, let me just ask a question. So, how many people are familiar with OpenRack?
Okay, more hands, that's good.
Good, okay. So, one of the things that we realized with OpenRack is that, it's people that have older equipment and have legacy equipment that they want to maintain. It's difficult to make that transformation to this new, larger, wider, deeper rack standard. And if you're operating in a hyperscale data center, you don't care about regulatory, safety, EMC.
And greenfield, right?
And greenfield, you don't care about that. And so there's no certifications that go on at the sled level. The rack itself is 1,200 millimeters deep, and it can extend out the front and back from there. So the suppliers have built they put a lot of stuff in OpenRack, right? And there's no regulatory compliance. That worked really well for a half a dozen or a dozen hyperscale customers. And OpenRack is wildly successful. I run into people all the time that are deploying OpenRack. And I just came back from Asia again. Lots of people building OpenRack product. But we also heard that that the carriers that you can't take a 1,200 millimeter rack. You may have to have some options there. You need to have some backwards compatibility. You need to have a few requirements, compliance for some NEPS requirements. And we really wanted to have something that that has some EMC and some safety certification around. So as an organization, it made sense that, hey, OpenRack doesn't work everywhere. We had to have an alternative. And this is the outcome of that incubation that occurred probably over an 18-month period.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. I think well stated. And as we went through this too, and we reviewed in this group, but we also did in the OpenRack group. And I think there were a little bit of eyebrows in the OpenRack. Why do you need something different? We'll go into. There are some reasons, but it's also the intent to track, and that's going to be the hard part, right? Because where do we go next? Because we want to track, right? You want to borrow. You want to take all the good stuff while plugging in a couple of holes and things, right? You don't want to diverge and just here's yet another thing. And actually, if I can say this, if you look at the standards, that have come, like OCS, and so there's things that are pretty splintered. The idea here is to have something that can be very influenced for telco, but not, it is certainly, of the same kind of collaborative, open, taking all the goodness from OpenRack as much as possible. So we don't have time to dive into all the details of why this choice or that choice, but I'm going to go through this. So to kind of cut to the chase, though, we did approve the spec. Be careful not to say it's not a standard; it's a spec. But the spec that was approved is a framework spec. So while it started out, from a Radisys point of view, we didn't know where it would end up. We have products and we'll talk about those. This is a spec. It's not a Radisys product. The thing that is approved is a spec that just defines geometries, interoperability at a very basic level. And Bill and I talked about this a bit. The more primitive you make the interoperability, the easier it is to interoperate. The more rules you make, the harder it is. And so certainly from a kind of telco standard point of view, we all know, I think for a lot of us, you can hammer out very detailed specific standards, you know, with very detailed compliance, and then have people build it. So it's a very, very slow process. So this is kind of a fairly simple common denominator. The spec's only about, I don't know, 30, 35 pages long, and it addresses the sled level interop, you know, power connections and geometries, basic things like that. There's room for more to come, and we'll talk about that next. So that's done. That's out there, version 1, and there's some products now coming that are now compliant to it. There is nothing binding. OCP doesn't have a structure, you know, that says, well, let's make sure this and OpenRack, you know, track perfectly. That's up to us to do. So if an innovation happens, you know, in, I don't know, the finance community, and it rolls into OpenRack, and you think that makes sense here, we've got to be aware of that. So we also talked about how the work groups get tied together. Flip it around the other way. There's a few things that are done in this architecture that are not purely telco things. They're just good things. They're interesting things. And I've been having some discussions with, you know, people from, let's say, the other side, or the different community, Facebook and so forth. That's really interesting, right? For example, some of the things in rear interconnect, which has been an idea floating around for a while. It's actually, you know, done in this, and that certainly could have applicability to greenfield data centers, right? Because it's just a good optics thing. Sorry, you'll hear this, so I'm just going to say it now. DC engine, that's a Radisys product name. Okay, so that's our product that fits this. Okay. This looks like, sorry, I'm just going to build the whole thing. It's take too much time otherwise. Okay, that's kind of a snapshot. So really simple in the geometry. It is a 19-inch rack width. The depth is actually not defined, but it is the first incarnation that we built is shallower, you know, than the full 1200. And so again, intended to go in kind of standard telco geometries, also standard data center geometries too. So kind of snapping to grid, I like to say. The other thing is the geometries, and you can do different subdivisions, but what's defined is full width and half width node, if you will, or sled. And AD-Link will give some examples of, you know, what can go inside the half width, but they can be carved up in different ways. But those are just basic geometries. They're actually industry standards, so again, you get more leverage. Again, if you're building greenfield, you don't need any leverage. And also, if you're buying thousands at a time, you maybe don't need to use bigger leverage. But you know, when we rolled out some initial products, we're able to get off-the-shelf motherboards, cost motherboards in sort of half SSI form factor. They fit in here very nicely. You use the whole space, and so, you know, there's a lot of products available. So that's why this has gone and can go very, very fast. In the rear, it uses the standard OpenRack defined 12-volt bus bars. I know there are new things now in OpenRack 2. I think one of the reasons to have a break is it allows the telco community to take a little bit of pause and say, do you want to pick that up or not? You're not going to, you can't change quite. We all want to change faster, but maybe not quite at the speed of, you know, that things may go. And so you can say, look, does that make sense? Does 48-volt distribution down into the CPU make sense? That's an interesting idea. Let's give a little bit of buffer and decide if we want to bring that over. So anyways, it's the 12-volt rails. The other thing that's not shown here, but the zones is not defined in the spec. How much of it you make to be the sled zone and how much of it you make to be what you can see there are the switches. It's just standard 19-inch rack mount. Right? They come in, they get AC power, or DC, and they sit in their own zone. They're not taking the 12 volts. So basically, you chop the rack into those two parts. The part that is going to be your interoperable sled level open rack, and then the part that is, you know, wherever you need to take off the shelf components, which typically is the switching. Any OCP approved switches can work in here. We'll see in some examples. We have some projects where we're doing things in the access space and so forth, where you bring in some different other kind of equipment. You want to be able to bring that in. Sometimes we make that zone in the top, you know, where the switches are bigger because maybe the whole rack is full of switches, right? And I have very little compute. Okay. Right now, there is nothing in this approved spec that says it has to be this way or that way. There's a lot of latitude. Okay. Oh, and then the fans. So the unit of granularity in the shelves is a 2U standard height. So again, normalized there. 2U height, and a fan covers the 2U. So there's some aggregation of, you know, cooling and power across a combination of servers. And again, you can see in the different architectures. OpenRack is a shorter geometry, but it can go taller. And then like OCS, for example, has bigger finishers. So there's lots of different things. That's what this one is. It's kind of in the middle. It's a sweet spot. It's good for acoustics. That was something that drove that. You You get too small, you have some acoustic problems, you're gonna have trouble with nets. So this is well suited for that. I think I spoke to much of this. The driver was very much kind of thinking of, we said CO retrofit, but we use the term CO data centers, edge data centers. You know, it's taking a data center philosophy into, you know, telecom networks. And we certainly see a lot of, you know, you got physical spaces that are changing, right? They have constraints, they're built in a certain way, but you're taking out some kind of monolithic equipment and going to a disaggregated model where you're putting in sort of standard data center gear. That's where this fits, and then you're putting your software infrastructure. I think I'm gonna see the rest of that. Bill hit these a little bit. The principles. So I kind of just have 2 slides here. Really quick summary. This is just OpenRack. I mean, I just, you know, we looked at this and said, okay, OpenRack. How does OpenRack fit in the principles of OCP? Should fit because it's kind of the base standard. Open, efficient, scale, and then I kind of put impact into that. You know, what is OpenRack bringing? I see it as it's a disaggregation, fundamentally disaggregating software and hardware, and you're bringing a normalized disaggregation infrastructure to web scale computing. And I say compute storage, right? Built for scale, very efficient architecture, the cooling, the airflow, the power. Obviously, you can continue to tune, but it's a good architecture. So that's the starting point. And then fundamentally open, multi-vendor, you know, open from day one, collaboration. So all of these things apply. And then a couple more details, all right, on this branch, if you will, right? And you start by inheriting those principles, right? So, you know, and nothing there from the previous slide changes. This has been multi-vendor. Part of it is because it's not led by, we're small, right? We can't just dictate anything on the industry. Collaboration with the customer base, and actually has been from day one. So this is well known, we worked closely with Verizon in some of the early definitions of this. But there are a lot of other carriers involved and other partners and vendors in the ecosystem. I mentioned, you know, just leverage standard motherboards and so forth. From day one, partially because we had no other choice. Let's see. This is also, I kind of put this under open. What we see, and I think this will change over time, but certainly there's a move towards very standard compute elements for all kinds of network infrastructure. But it's not 100% there, and I don't think, you know, you move into a model where instead of a box that's built, that's a black box doing a bunch of stuff, you disaggregate. So you have certainly standard compute elements, but there is room for, and there's a lot of, you know, discussion around how do you use, you know, some added components, some things that sit along with that infrastructure, right? So I call it heterogeneous computing. So things that you can bring in to do certain kinds of processing, for example, you know, graphics and GPU processing, things that might fit certain kinds of applications, or DSP-like things, for example, for higher performance and transcoding. There's room for those kinds of technologies, I think, in, you know, carrier networks going forward, but you have to bring them in a way that's very segmentable, disaggregatable, and again, kind of commoditizable. So that came into this, and part of the geometry was thinking, how do you leverage standard PCI cards? And that's one reason to make a little bit bigger sled, because you can literally plug in a standard PCI card. You know, with some, you got to fold them over, do some risers, but they fit, and that matters. And it's very easy to do that, and we can take a bunch of off-the-shelf stuff. So I consider that open in the sense that you're opening to stuff that's already been done, no reinvent the wheel. Anything else to highlight here? Bill hit a couple of these. Thinking about thermal and emissions, you know, one thing you'll just see when you look at the equipment is there is an enclosure. And I know Nokia's done some nice work with Airframe on OpenRack to kind of address some of these things and putting some shielding around things. But that's kind of an add-on, and we'll see where that goes. This is kind of a built-in, so that was some of the thinking of, you know, build it so that you can, you know, have some containment in there, right? Because it matters. And I talked about the acoustics as well. Okay. So my tagline, you know, or a tagline, I don't know if I came up with it. Kind of the idea here is to bring OCP technology and OpenRack in particular to service providers, tracking but decoupled from, you know, web code-driven changes. I just use the term web code to, you know, because a lot of the drivers, right? Microsoft, Facebook, and Google behind a lot of the innovation that's happening. We were bringing that goodness over to time. So,
So Andrew, I think one of the things that we also did was look ahead and collaborated, knowing that Microsoft was having a 19-inch product announcement at Olympus. We said, let's make sure that the motherboards. Yeah. So.
And it's very loose, I agree, because collaboration is tricky. So, I mean, the bar was very low. Could you put that thing over here? Yes, you can, right? Exactly. Part of the thing there was don't try to do too much. So there's just big space, 9 inches wide, it's high, and you can absolutely take that and say, I'm going to take this on, we're going to lift this kind of thing over, right? So leverage, it's about leverage, right? This is kind of more the same, but this is, the idea here is this should, it's fundamentally decomposition, multi-vendor, so this does kind of have to have, where this goes from here matters a lot, right? It needs to get, it'll be interesting to see when we figure out how we track this in work groups and things and kind of keep it on, a path. But if it splinters too much or gets too specific in implementations, it may not achieve this kind of unlocked, environment. So Radisys has something we believe strongly in our role. If we bring solutions that turn around to just locking into us, we fail, right? And that might be good for 1 or 2 deals, but ultimately we're not going to survive it. So we have to be open, it has to be multi-vendor. And I'm not naming names here. I mean, that's more of a model. I believe that some of the companies that have, been prevalent in more the traditional procurement model that we'll talk about later, are also understanding this is the landscape, so there's different ways to it. But that's what this is certainly intended to. I think the dollar savings, there's some good operational things just in the architecture that can drive it. You need to get, one of the biggest things in dollar savings is getting volumes, right? Getting big installations with big volumes and some heft behind putting this together, that will drive the cost down. This might lead into the next one. Okay, so this is a segue to the next segment. So the spec, as I mentioned, it focuses on a sled level interrupt, and from that you see pieces of the rack and everything else. But the rack itself is not defined. It doesn't say how tall it needs to be or anything like that. I mentioned the second bullet, updating it to track things. So already stuff is going on. We need to now be thinking of how do we digest those, right? OpenRack-2, what on there needs to come over. I do want to point one thing in architecture. This architecture does define a rear connectivity. Part of that was very much for OpEx, optimization, right? Sleds, they come in, they come out, they plug into some connectors in the back that connect however you want to. It doesn't say how they have to connect, but it does say that it uses that. We did have some discussion. We did not preclude front connectivity. So, if I believe the 80 countries actually has that capability. You can connect stuff in the front. So if people want to say, look, I don't want to go optics. I want to go with copper interconnect here. You can do that in kind of the traditional front cable. None of our products do that. We're kind of driving this to something that we think is more operationally efficient. But that's open. I think there may be some room there if work is done in front to say how should that look. Product contributions should start popping up. There's a couple we'll talk about in the pipeline, some that have already been approved. We will talk about, I think, the evolution of where do they get approved right now. Some of this is happening in the Telco work group. We tee it up here, we have discussions, and then the OCP group says, yep, thumbs up, that looks good. But some of these elements, compute element's a compute element, right? So there's a compute group inside of OCP, and maybe that compute group should be, giving the thumbs up to compute elements that fit here. Or at least being aware of, because a compute element for CG-OpenRack-19 and a compute element for OpenRack and a compute element for OCS, there should be some synergies, right? What else? We've had sessions, we keep doing those, so there's a lot of evangelism, maybe that's not the right term, just spreading knowledge going on. So we had a couple stuff at the summit, we have this. In the summit, it was interesting because we did some stuff in the Telco session, and then we also did, and I'm going to reprise some of the slides that want. I put them all, which is not reprised. I'll just skip them. The management track. And what I found interesting was I went over and attended that, and none of this group was there. So there is a little bit of siloing that we've got to watch out for. So we gave a discussion about management in that track, but I'm not sure we got the pollination. We really wanted to do it outside of just the Telco because it was useful stuff. So we do need to think about how the different groups interact. And then the last thing I've been speaking to, this is, I think, just a big push is to fan out. Okay. So we're looking for collaborators. We're looking for competition. You know, we're looking for just people coming in and saying, yeah, let's go. I think this is a bandwagon to jump on. So,